Thank you. Oops. I'm going to try again. 1 second. You talk.
Right. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Our Tuesday morning kvias, or learning Torah together. And personally, and I think I'm speaking for lots of people, I feel much more confident about the next phase of life here in Medinat Yisrael with a new government than I did with the previous government on lots of different levels, nationalist level, religious level, security levels, that in some sense, the idea that this is in fact a Medina Yehudit, that it is a Jewish state and not just a secular state, but it's a Jewish state, and we have to defend the Jewish nature of this country. I think is back on the agenda again, Baruch Hashem. And there were nisim in this election, absolute nisim, remarkable turn of events. And Baruch Hashem, we can hopefully be cautiously optimistic of the next stage forward, even though we don't have a new government yet. But it affects everybody. You shouldn't think it doesn't affect you. These changes affect everybody. Anyhow, we come together on a Tuesday morning not to discuss politics, but to learn Torah together. And I don't know if you remember, but at the end of last week's shir, I left you all with a little bit of homework. Now, most school children don't do their homework, so I assume that you are all in that category of people who don't do their homework. But I told you that there is a crucial pasuk in Bereshis chapter 1, pasuk 26, in the creation of the human being, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu uses a very strange word, and the word is Naaseh Adam B'Tzalmeinu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't say in all other stages of the creation. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, right, Yehi Or, Vayhi Or, Totzei Oretz Desha. There should be vegetation, right? There should be animals. There should be fish in the sea, right? Yehi Ma'oros B'Riki HaShamayim. There should be a solar system. All of these things, HaKadosh Baruch Hu instructs the universe to develop in one particular way, to create that the solar system should emerge out of the tohu v'vohu and come into existence. Suddenly, when it comes to the creation of man, the final act of creation on the agenda of the whole of chapter 1, HaKadosh Baruch Hu uses the plural. Na'aseh Adam b'Tzalmeinu. Let us together make the human being. Who is he talking to? What is he referring to? Why use the plural? Has anybody got any thoughts on this subject? Or have you read anything on this subject? Or have you looked up anything on this subject? It's a very fascinating and crucial moment in Bereshis, in the way in which the world came into existence. Anybody like to add anything or say anything? Because it's a pivotal point in Maaseh Bereshis. On a simple level, some of the Mefarshim say that we are accustomed to the fact that royalty often uses the royal we. I think in English as well, right? In English, we do this. When the king or the queen speaks, they don't say, I want to do this. They say, we have decided to do this, right? And possibly the whole idea of using a royal we comes from this pasuk, chapter 1, pasuk 26. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu, b'chvodo v'atzmai, says, we will create man, in the plural. And the point of a royal we is to, if you like, indicate that what is being planned is not for a personal. If you say, I want to do something, or I plan to do something, there's an element of a personal interest in it. When we say we are going to do this, it means we are all going to do this together, meaning it's in everybody's interest. In other words, the creation of the animals was good for the animals, not necessarily good for the vegetation. The creation of the solar system was good for the solar system, but the creation of man, Nase Adam, we will create man. The implication is that this is going to benefit the universe. That man is being brought into this world in order to, right, la'ovda u'l'shamra, we're going to see later on, that the man is being brought into this world in order to preserve and develop and cultivate and strengthen the world in lots of different ways. So the we is a royal we, implying a global benefit will come from this creation more than from anything else. Right? When HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates trees, okay, it's nice to have trees, it's nice to have fruit. We could exist without it, possibly. And the world could exist without this particular fruit or that particular tree. But the world would not be able to exist in its optimum way without the intervention of mankind, la'ovda u'l'shamra, as we're going to see in a few moments. So I think that's the first pshat in the Naaseh. The first pshat in the Naaseh is the sentiment of HaKadosh Baruch Hu using the royal plural. Has anyone ever heard the king or the queen sort of speaking? I'm sure we've all heard what used to be the queen and now probably the king, right, of England and other kings and queens. That is the nusach, that's the way royalty speaks. And there is a message in it, right? The message is we're doing it on behalf of the nation. I think that's the point of the royal we. So that's the first pshat. The second pshat is an interesting one brought down in Rashi. Because Rashi says an interesting thing. This is an interesting theme here in Rashi. I was looking at my text. I forgot to print this particular Rashi. So you'll just have to trust me that this is what Rashi says on this particular passage. Rashi actually raises a question. Rashi says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, by using the plural, opens the door for apikorsim, opens the door for people who do not believe in Hashem Echad, for the people who believe in multiple deities and multiple gods, for the pagans, to believe that Ki'ilu HaKadosh Baruch Hu is, when he's creating the world, he's not working alone. He's working with other powers. And there were other powers alongside of God. Right? The pagan world believed, even the pagans who believed in a God, they believed also in the gods of nature, which were working alongside of the ultimate God. Right? This is what Chazal usually refer to as shtei reshuyos. Shtei reshuyos is a phrase meaning it's opposite of Hashem Echad. Right? Hashem Echad implies clearly monotheism, right? The oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there are no powers alongside of God. But Naaseh seems to imply, or at least suggests, or is open to an interpretation that there is, in fact, multiple gods, that Naaseh will do it together. So Rashi is bothered, Rashi is quoting Chazal, who are bothered by this. But Rashi says something very interesting, that lelamdeinu derech eretz. Interesting thing this. Lelamdeinu derech eretz. It teaches us morality or ethical way of life, right? Derech eretz kodmo laTorah. That in a sense, the whole book of Bereshis was written in order to establish principles of derech eretz, not to establish principles of halacha. The book of Bereshis doesn't give us Hilchas Kashrus or Shabbos or Pesach or Yom Kippur or anything like that at all, but it gives us derech eretz. What is the issue of derech eretz here? Says Rashi, quoting Chazal, that even if you're in a senior position and a position of power and authority, consult with others, consult with people less than you, consult with people who are in a sense of a lower status than you are, because maybe they've got something interesting to say. Maybe they've got an interesting contribution to make to your idea. In other words, don't decide alone. That's a very interesting thing. If you would have thought anybody can decide alone, it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's the Borei Olam, in fact, decided alone to create the world. When he came to creating man, say Chazal in Rashi, he wanted to give us also this message of don't be autocratic. Don't make decisions unilaterally without consulting. Consult the family, consult your wife, consult your husband, consult your employees, right? Work together. So in a sense, Rashi, it's a very interesting thing that Rashi, that Chazal saw in this word Naaseh, so to speak, HaKadosh Baruch Hu consulting. So who was he consulting? There was no human being to consult. He was consulting maybe the Malachim. There's Midrashim about HaKadosh Baruch Hu consulting the Malachim. Maybe he's consulting the forces of nature in some metaphorical sense. He's consulting, but he's not doing it completely alone. He's doing it after consultation. And this is a very interesting theme. Incidentally, we find this also in the Mishnah in Sanhedrin. So the Mishnah in Sanhedrin, of course, deals with, as the name suggests, the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin was the Supreme Court of the Jewish people for many centuries, and not to be confused with the Supreme Court that we have nowadays, which is of a completely different type. But the Supreme Court of the Sanhedrin were the senior Talmidei Chachamim in the whole of Klal Yisrael, 71 Rabbanim, and there was always a lot of debate among the Rabbanim. But at the end of the day, they had to make a decision, right? But what was important about it was to consult with each other, and to that end, it's very interesting. The Mishnah says in Sanhedrin that when a Bezdin is called upon to make a decision, matchilin min hatzad, or a poischin, I think it says poischin min hatzad. What does it mean, poischin min hatzad? It means when the Dayanim are asked to give an opinion, we start with the most junior Dayan. The most junior Dayan first says his opinion, and then you go up the ladder until the Rosh Bezdin gives his opinion. We don't start with the Rosh Bezdin, because the Rosh Bezdin, once he said his opinion, other people might be a bit intimidated or overwhelmed and unwilling to give their opinion. So the Rosh Bezdin says, right, we are now going to come and we've heard the case. We now have to make a decision. Poschid min hatzad. We first want to hear the view of the junior Dayanim, and then only later on the senior Dayanim. And this is this principle, the principle of consultation. The principle of hearing a variety of views. At the end, of course, there has to be someone who makes the final decision, obviously, right? There has to be, you can't leave it open in order to be decisive. And that's what the Mishnah is all about, how the Bezdin comes to a decision. But again, the decision of the Dayanim and the Sanhedrin is never one man's decision. It's always a consensus, right? It has to be a right. The decision of the Bezdin depended on the majority view. Even if the most senior Dayanim had a particular view, if they were outvoted, then the vote went the other way. So it's very interesting to see that even though the truth is that the appointment of the Dayanim is not democratic. The appointment of the Dayanim works on a meritocracy, in other words, according to their standard of learning and their standard of personalities and their personality traits. There's a whole description of what you need to be in order to be a Dayan, in order to be a Dayan on a Bezdin or on a Sanhedrin, what midas you need to have and what track record you need to have in terms of being uncorruptible and these sort of things, and being sensitive. Incidentally, a Dayan, can't be an unmarried man. A member of the Bezdin, the Sanhedrin, can't be an unmarried man, says the Rambam. Because as an unmarried man, he's not sensitive. He's not sensitive to the needs of the youth, the needs of the next generation. The greatest seminar in dealing with selfishness is getting married, right? Getting married is you have to wake up in the middle of the night and look after the little kids. You have to deal with the needs of the children, of the grandchildren, and the needs of the husband, the need of the wife. The marriage itself is a seminar against training oneself out of selfishness and out of self-aggrandizement, not to think too much of oneself. That is that's built in. So in other words, the dayanim need to be in some ways, they're specially selected, but even after they're specially selected, it's all na'aseh, the na'aseh odom principle reflects itself in the Sanhedrin, that poschid min hatzad, that we start consulting the junior members of the Sanhedrin first. Okay, so the first answer to our question is the royal we. The second answer to the question is this Rashi, right? That it's a question of consulting. But in this Rashi, there's another very interesting hidden idea. Because Rashi says, how can the Torah write Naseh? You're opening the door for apikorsim. You're opening the door for idolaters to say there are many gods. And he gives the answer that is to teach us derech eretz, to consult. So when you've read the Rashi, you think to yourself, but wait a minute. So the Torah, what Rashi is saying is that if there's a message to be taught, and the message is derech eretz, to be taught, we don't care that apikorsim may come and misinterpret the text. We're not going to allow ourselves to be led by the way in which people who deny the basics of Torah and mitzvahs, the way they might misunderstand or misuse the Torah. That's not going to be our guiding principle. This in itself, incidentally, is a very interesting debate on lots of different levels. If a person wishes to perform a mitzvah, right, to what extent you have to take into consideration the fact that there may be non-religious people or people who deny the Torah, and they will misinterpret what you're doing, or they might misuse what you're doing. There's an interesting question which comes up in Israel on a few different occasions, which is an interesting halachic question. Let me ask you all this question, and I'm going to take a vote on this, Rabbi says. I want an answer to this question. What do you think? Let's say a baby is born in, let's say, a non-religious kibbutz or a non-religious shchuna, non-religious area of town, right? The baby is born, and he's born on Shabbos. And because he's born on Shabbos, the baby is healthy. The bris milah has to be the next Shabbos. Right? Everybody with me so far? Right? The bris milah is on the 8th day. Bris milah is on Shabbos. Do we do a bris milah on Shabbos? Yes, we do. Even though the actual cutting and the bleeding and everything of the circumcision is a violation of Shabbos, there's a special pasuk Chazal learn out by Yom HaShmini on the 8th day, even if it's Shabbos. Now, the moil comes to you, you're the rabbi, and asks you the following question. I could go there on Shabbos and do the bris milah, but I know that there'll be 200 people turning up with their cars and their phones, and the chilul Shabbos will be enormous if I do the bris milah on Shabbos. Maybe I should delay the bris milah till Sunday. A bris milah done on Sunday is maybe not an optimum bris milah. Maybe it's not optimum, because the best thing is to do it on the 8th day. But often we delay it for a few days because the baby's not so well. In other words, it's possible to delay the bris milah. A bris milah done on day 9 or 10 or 11 is a 100% valid bris milah. It's absolutely valid bris milah. But the Torah says, do it on the 8th day, even if it's Shabbos. But the family and friends of the baby are without doubt are going to come and drive on Shabbos. There's going to be a lot of taking pictures and photographs and cooking and baking, and all sorts of activities will be done in violation of the Shabbos, because we're doing the bris milah on Shabbos. Let's delay it till Sunday. So what do you think, ladies and gentlemen? Should we delay the bris milah on Sunday and avoid a lot of chilul Shabbos? Or should we go ahead with it and we don't care that there's chilul Shabbos? What do you think? Anybody got any thoughts on the subject?
It should definitely be on Shabbos, but I'm no ger b'davar because I know the answer from before.
Okay, so Mari has attended a shir of mine where we've seen some sources on this in the past. But if you remember, Murray, you remember there were even among the poskim, the modern poskim, there were different views on this. Anybody got any other thoughts?
Yes.
Any thoughts on the subject? What do you think, Michael? Michael Gross, what do you think?
Well, you may as well cancel Yom Kippur because hundreds of people come in their cars. Some of them stand outside shul in England in Edgware smoking. So why not cancel it and have Yom Kippur on a Sunday instead of a Shabbos?
Right. So, actually, Michael's point is a very, very valid point. In other words, if you're going to adjust, if you're going to change our Jewish practice because of the people who are not observant, because of the people who are not going to keep the halachas, then there's no end to this. There's no end to this, right? It would mean, for example, Yom Kippur, or even just generally, how could you publicize your timetable for your davening on Rosh Hashanah and Kippur, knowing that lots of people will come and drive to shul? Right? So what's the answer? So anybody else got any thoughts on this subject, or any feelings, or any thoughts on this? It's actually a very contentious issue. It's something which among Rabbonim is very hotly debated. There's some Rabbonim would say, obviously you do it on Shabbos. Who cares whether they're Machal Shabbos or not? And there are other Rabbonim who say, what are you talking about? You're going to facilitate, you're going to be party to hundreds of people being Machal Shabbos. You are encouraging them to be Machal Shabbos. Do it tomorrow. It's not quite like your Yom Kippur example, Michael, because Yom Kippur, of course, is on Yom Kippur. Whereas with regards to bris milah, it's still a 100% valid circumcision if it's done on day 9.
Could I comment?
Sure.
I was just going to say, what about if you could have it on Saturday? But sometimes Shabbat might finish early, and then you could have it at night, or just so that it's right after Shabbos, but still on Saturday. It's just an idea.
So that's a very creative. That's a very creative solution. The only problem is halachically, we never do a bris milah at night. A bris milah has to be done by day and not at night. And that wouldn't really solve the problem. We can't do it at night. You have to decide: are we doing this bris milah? First of all, I'd like to welcome Dina to our shir. Hi, Dina. I hope all is well. Good. Excellent. So, because Eli is desperately looking forward to getting some assistance in his onerous task, and you're the person.
Bezrat Hashem next time.
Okay, lovely. You see that, Eli? You see you've got somebody a stand in for you. Please
We
God.
stand for each other. We work together. Bezrat Hashem.
Work together. There we go. You've got a shutfus, Eli. You've got a shutfus here, a partnership.
We're delighted.
A very good idea. So we can't do it. We can't do a bris milah at night. We're doing it during the day, and if we do it on Shabbos, it'll encourage lots of people to be Machal Shabbos. So in actual fact, most of the poskim, people like the Tzitz Eliezer and many other poskim, Rav Moshe Feinstein, they say we go ahead and do the bris milah, even if it's on Shabbos, even if there are people who will be Machal Shabbos. That's not our concern. We don't adjust our halachic life, our Jewish practice, because people will misuse it. And interestingly, one of the sources is this Rashi. This Rashi on Naseh Odom B'Tzalmeinu. Rashi says, look, here's an example. HaKadosh Baruch Hu uses the plural, Naseh Odom B'Tzalmeinu, even though it's opening a door for apikorasim to say, Chas v'shalom, there are shtei reshuyos, and God had to ask permission from other forces in order to create man. Even though it's open to that, nevertheless, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to teach us derech eretz. So in other words, because it's important to teach us derech eretz, the fact that it might be misused and misunderstood, it's not our problem. That's not our problem. That's the problem of the people who misuse it or abuse it. So there is this view that you go ahead nonetheless. I must tell you that not all the poskim agree with this. Many poskim, there was a famous poskim who's not alive anymore in Bnei Brak, Rav Wozner. Rav Wozner was a man who wrote the Shilas and Chuvas, many volumes of Shilas and Chuvas, was one of the poskim of the previous century, and from the Hungarian school. And he writes, it's posh to me, of course you put off the bris milah till Sunday. Why would you want to facilitate? Why would you want to encourage hundreds of people to Mechal Shabbos? Let's do it in a way which minimizes Chilul Shabbos. Other poskim say, Chas v'shalom, how can you possibly put it off? It's one of those, it's a question which is it's a judgment call. You can't really bring any halachic sources to prove one way or another. It's a judgment call, but it is a value judgment as well. It's a value judgment about how to interact. Halacha lemaisa, I know many moyalim, people who do the bris milah, right, who have the practice that if they know that the family are not religious, and there will be dozens of people or more who will be Mechal Shabbos, they say to the parents, I'm sorry, the baby doesn't look so well. They fabricate a reason for delaying the bris milah for a few days. The baby's looking a bit unwell. I'm going to wait a few days until I feel he's a bit stronger. In order not to get into a fight with the family and not to somehow make it into a major issue, they dodge the bullet, right? By fabricating some sort of the baby's not feeling so well. And generally speaking, Moelim do avoid doing a bris milah on Shabbos, even though, as I say, most poskim take the view that yes, it's important. Even Rav Yosef in his tshuva also says that it's important to do the bris milah on Shabbos, irrespective of people who maybe misuse it, abuse it. That's the halacha. That's what the Torah wants of us. And those who wish to abuse it will abuse it, and that's it. Anyhow, this is an interesting topic, an interesting theme. All comes out of this Rashi of Naseh Odom. Let's move on a little bit now, and let's look at a text. So I'm now going to look at a text of the Ramban, because the Ramban brings down a very interesting interpretation of Naaseh Odom B'Tzalmeinu. By way of introduction, I just want to tell you a little bit about my family, and you'll see why this is relevant as we get into this Ramban. Because my family Kimche, trace our ancestry back to the 12th century, where there were a group of Rabbanim. There was one Rav called Rabbi Yosef Kimche, who wrote many Sfarim, which we have. And Rabbi Yosef Kimche is not such a famous name, because most of his Sfarim were very technical and very textual, and really only for specialists. And he was a linguist. He was a Hebraist, and he was translating texts from Hebrew into Latin, from Latin into Hebrew, from Hebrew and Latin into Arabic, and from Arabic, Latin, Hebrew, and Arabic. He was one of the world's top translators and linguists, and he wrote books about Hebrew grammar and about Hebrew language and about punctuation and vocalization, very technical stuff. But Rabbi Yosef Kimche was a well-known rabbinic figure in the early 1100s in the south of France. He lived in a town called Narbonne. Anybody been to the south of France, into what's called Provence? Provence is not a bad place to live. You've got to live somewhere outside of Israel. South of France is, all things being considered, not a bad place to live. What do you say, Elian? Nice place to live? Beautiful. Yes,
it is indeed.
It is indeed a very beautiful place. A very beautiful place. Right, so Rabbi Yosef Kimche, he was one of the Gedolei Yisrael at the time, but his son became world famous. His son was Rabbi David Kimche, otherwise known as Radak. And the Radak is one of the most prominent commentaries on the Tanakh. If you open a classic Tanakh, you will see there's Rashi, Ibn Ezra, and Radak. Those are the three pillars of commentary of the Rishonim. And the Radak of David Kimche was an ancestor of ours, and they were called Kimche from the word kemach. Kemach is flour, of course, and they were by profession, they were millers. They owned mills, and they made flour. Farmers came with the wheat, and they made it into flour. So they were called kimchi. And in fact, in Israel today, I don't know if I mentioned this to you in the past, there are quite a few kimchis around in Israel today, but most of them are not the genuine article. Do not be misled, ladies and gentlemen, by fake kimchis, right? There are lots of fake kimchis around whose name was Miller. They came from Europe and their name was Miller. And they asked, what's a good Hebraization of the name Miller? And they were told kimchi. So whenever I meet a kimchi, I ask them, Nunu, are you a Miller or are you a kimchi? Right? Because you don't want to get stuck with the non-authentic kimchis, obviously not. Incidentally, the Russian name Melnik is also a Miller. So the Melniks and the Millers all became kimchis in Israel today. But I'm afraid they are fake imitations. The real kimchis all come back from, go back to the family kimchi from the 12th century. And most of the family afterwards, once they were expelled from France in the 1300s, 1400s, they were expelled from France. Most of them ended up in Russia and Russian Lithuania, where my family lived for at least 10 generations that we know of in the land of the Litvaks. The other half of the family went to Izmir. They went to Turkey. And there's also a big kimchi family in Turkey. And I've met a few of the Izmir kimchis who also trace themselves back to the Radak. We're now going to learn a piece of Ramban, and you're going to see in a minute why. And the reason is because he's got a peirush of Naaseh Odom B'Tzalmenu, which he says, this is the best peirush ever. And I heard it from Rabbi Yosef Kimche. That's what he writes in his commentary ala Torah. So you'll understand why I've selected, completely at random, of course, I've selected this Ramban for us to learn together. Let's have a look at this, just 1 second. Right. Okay, so this is the pasuk we're looking at, right? This is the pasuk we're looking at. Vayomer Elokim Naaseh Odom B'Tzalmeinu Kidmusei. Let us make man in the image of God. Okay, and now we'll have a look here in the Ramban. Says the Ramban. Everybody with me? Let's learn a bit of text inside, as we always do. Pshat Hanochai. Let me tell you what it really means. Right? This is the Ramban being very confident and emphatic. Pshat Hanochai, the milas Naaseh. The word Naaseh has got a very beautiful peirush. He says, why? Hu mipnei. I've already showed you above. That's the Ramban on Bereshit chapter 1, pasuk 1. We looked at it together. Ki Elokim boro yesh me'ayin b'yom harishon levada. That the actual creation, yesh me'ayin, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created something out of nothing, that only happened for 1 second on day one. Right? So what did he create? He created the raw materials. From those raw materials, what the scientists today would call the subatomic particles, out of all these particles, Yotzar, what did he do? He engaged in another activity, not the activity of Boro, Beis Reish Aleph, but the activity of Yotzar, right? Yetzira means to create something using pre-existing raw materials, and va'asa. So the Torah uses the word vayitzer Hashem or naaseh, right? V'kasher nosan b'mayim kach hasharos lishros nefesh chaya v'yamav yishatzu hamayim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu put certain powers into the creation that out of the previous existing life forms, new life forms will emerge. This Ramban is a little bit similar to, if you like, a concept of evolution, that you can get out of lower life forms, can evolve and mutate into higher life forms. That's perfectly acceptable. Let's have a look. So it says here, okay, when he came to creating animals, the Pasuk says, 2 psukim earlier, Totzei ha'oretz nefesh chaya, that the earth should give forth, out of the earth will evolve, will develop the animal world. But he says, Omar ba'odam na'aseh. But when it comes to the human being, he says the word na'aseh, kert loima. I think I've mentioned to you a few times before, it's a key word here. Whenever you're learning Rishonim, this word, kert loima, kaf lamed vav mem reish, is a key word. It's important in your methodology of learning to know that kert loima means that what is being said here is not exactly a literal translation. Kert loima, right? It's as if it would say, it's as if HaKadosh Baruch Hu was saying, Ani v'ha'oretz haniskeres na'aseh odom. I, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, together with the earth, together we will make man. Shetotzi ha'oretz haguf miyasodeha, that out of the earth itself will come the physical body, kasher osod v'heima v'chaya, similarly to the animal world, as the Pasuk says, Vayitza Hashem Elokim es ha'adam ofa bin ha'adama. So that's the first half, and the oretz, the land, will indeed contribute the physical matter out of which the human body is created, but that's only half the story, right? So it's going to be nasa, it's going to be a joint effort. Why? The earth will contribute the body, the yitain hu yisparach haruach, that he, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, will then contribute the neshama, the pi elyon, right, which comes from the world of the Ein Sof, which comes from the infinite world. That the Pasuk says, "Vayipach ba'apov nishmas chayim," that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so to speak, endowed man with a yitin hu yisparach ruach v'yipach ba'apov nishmas chayim. So the Ramban is saying there's a very important reason why it says na'aseh. It means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Kaviyachol himself, is working together with the physical world to make a hybrid creature. In other words, no other creature in the world was a hybrid. Every other creature in the world was either a physical creature, like an animal or a planet, or it was purely spiritual, like a malach, right? But there was no creature in the world that came from a joint effort of both the purely spiritual world and the purely physical world, and that's the na'aseh. And what does it mean, b'tzalmeinu kidmuseinu? Again, the plural, that'll be in our image. He said, what does it mean? It means ki yidme l'shneihem maschunas gufa la'aretz. With regards to its body, it will exhibit the qualities of physical matter, ashenukach mimena, because he has been taken from the earth. The yidme baruach le'elyonim. But in terms of his ruach, meaning his neshama, he will have qualities similar to the elyonim, she'ena guf, right, which don't have a physical body, v'lo tomus, and never dies. So this is the Ramban referring to the idea that we have, right? We say every morning, Elokai neshama shenasato bi tahoroi. The neshama in the human being is eternal. The neshama, which is the real self, the real spiritual self of the person, that never dies. And that's our concept of Olam Haba. Olam Haba means the guf, of course, disintegrates. The body disintegrates, but the neshama doesn't. The neshama, from the very beginning, HaKadosh Baruch Hu combined together the body and the soul. And the soul is infinite. The neshama comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the body comes from the earth, and therefore this hybrid creature had to be created in a special way, and the introductory word is nasa. We'll do it together. Va'omar b'kosav hasheni, b'tzelem elokim bara oso, b'sapeh hapele. And this actually is the amazing thing. Asher niflabo mishah nivroim. And in this way, the human being is different from all other creatures, And here comes the most important part of this Ramban, ladies and gentlemen. I heard this from Rabbi Kimche, and it's the best pshat out of all the perushim that anyone has ever said about it. So I thought that's quite a nice little piece of Ramban here, Ramban ala Torah. He got interesting. He calls it Rabbi Yosef HaKimche. Instead of Rabbi Yosef Kimche, HaKimche, the Kimche. And he was known as the Kimche. That's what he was famous for. And his son David was Rabbi David Kimche. So so Yosef Kimche lived from 1105 to 1170. I've got written down here. 1105 to 1170, which is the generation before the Ramban. But then Rabbi David Kimche lived from 1160 to 1235, and that's exactly a contemporary of the Ramban himself. So the Ramban is living in Spain, right, in Toledo and Barcelona. The Ramban is living in the middle of the Spanish Jewry, and the Radak is living in Narbonne in the south of France. But it's interesting that the Gedolei Yisrael in Spain, they had access to the writings and the ideas of the Gedolei Yisrael in Narbonne. This is one in the south of France. Actually, the south of France, just as a historical footnote, it's interesting to know that the south of France played quite an important role in Jewish life in the 12th, 13th, 14th century. Because during that period, the south of France was, of course, on the coast, on the Mediterranean coast, right? And Narbonne and Avignon and lots of these cities on the Mediterranean coast of the south of France. And because of that, they had a lot of travelers, a lot of Jewish tradesmen and travelers who traveled to the Sephardi world. There was lots of people coming from, let's say, North Africa, from Morocco, from Tunisia, from Algeria, would pass by the south of France and the ports of the south of France. They did a lot of business with them. And then also Italy and Spain. So they were very much connected to the Sephardi world. And there was a lot of traffic, a lot of communication. There were letters and documents and manuscripts which were shared among the Jewish community. So it's interesting that the Jews who lived in Ashkenaz was northern France and central France, more to Germany, France and Germany, that was Ashkenaz. But south of France was much closer to the Sephardim, was much closer to the Sephardi world, even though it was France, but they really communicate. You see here, the Ramban in Barcelona already had in front of him the writings of Rabbi Yosef Kimche, who just lived a few years earlier. And it was already there on his desk, and he was inspired by it, and he's citing him. So it's a very interesting connection there. Also, when the Rambam came to write his Mishnah Torah, so the Rambam wanted. The Rambam was a young up-and-coming star in the rabbinic scene in his early 30s, and like all young rabbanim, when he writes a book, he wants to get a haskama. He wants to get an affirmation or an approbation from some senior rabbanim. So one of the people he sent his manuscript to was the Ravet. Ravet Reish Aleph Beis Daled was Rabbi Avraham ben David, and he was in the south of France, right? The Ravet in the south of France was one of the Gedolei Yisrael in the south of France, but because of all the traffic connecting south of France to Spain, Rambam decided he's going to send his manuscript to the Ravet for an approbation. What happened there, of course, was something paradoxical. That the people hadn't heard so much about the Ravet, even though the Rambam knew about him. But what happened was the Ravet was so impressed by the 14-volume work of the Rambam that he didn't just write a haskama the way you have it nowadays, but he went through every line. He went through every line of the Rambam, and he wrote in the margin where he disagreed. And the paradox is that nowadays, when you open a Rambam, here we're now 850 years later, you open a Rambam, so the Rambam's words and thoughts and halachas are central to Jewish thought, and the writings of the Raavad are only known to us because they are footnotes on the Rambam. In other words, when it was written, the Rambam was the junior and the Raavad was the senior. The Rambam went on, of course, to become a central figure in Jewish thought, and the Raavad became known to us through his writings. Anyway, why do I mention all this? Because the ancient Jewish history of the Middle Ages actually had quite an important effect on us, because when we learn Torah, we're learning the Rishonim. We're learning the Torah of the Middle Ages, largely. Rashi, Tosfos, the Ramban, the Radak, the Ibn Ezra, they really give us the depth of our Torah learning. And in that sense, so to see the Ramban quoting of Yosef Kimche definitely warms my heart. So I thought I'd share that with you, and I feel better already just for sharing it with you. That is definitely a beautiful piece. So there we have. So we've got now three perushim on Naaseh. One is it's the royal we. The other is Rashi, that is to teach you Derech Eretz. And then you have the Ramban, who says, in the name of Yosef Kimche, that this actually means that the human being was a hybrid creation. Naaseh Oda means me, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, together with you, the physical earth, we will combine together in partnership to make this unique being, which has a body and a soul, a guf and a neshama. Let's go back to this pasuk for a minute. Okay, so that's as much as I wanted to say about Naaseh for the time being. What I'd like to do with you maybe next week, please God, I want to learn with you a famous piece of Rabbi Yosef Ber Soloveitchik. Rabbi Yosef Ber Soloveitchik, so I think I've got it here on the text. Yes. Rabbi Yosef Ber Soloveitchik, in 1965, he gave a major speech, which later on came to be known as the Lonely Man of Faith, and later on came to be translated into Hebrew as Ish HaEmunah, right? And in the Lonely Man of Faith, he relates to the following issue, and that is, he relates to the fact, actually, when we look in the Sefer Bereshis, we find something extraordinary. We find that man and woman are created in chapter 1. Nase Adam b'tzalmeinu, right? Zocho nekeva bra'am. He creates man and woman together in chapter 1. And then we move into chapter 2. And in chapter 2, man and woman are again created. Only it's a different narrative. It's a different it's a different story. It's man created alone, and then he feels lonely, and then God puts him to sleep and takes part of the man and creates the woman out of his rib. It's a whole different story. But that's only in Bereshit chapter 2. In Bereshit chapter 1, man and woman are created together in a very simple, straightforward way. And what's going on here? Why are there, and this is a very fascinating question, which I hope to look at, please God, next week. Why are there two different narratives of the creation of the human being? Why are there two different narratives? I just want to tell you, just in passing, that of course the apikorsim, the academic Bible critics who have been with us for a couple of hundred years already, right? They have got, of course, a whole different story about this. Whenever they find conflicting narratives, they say, well, you know, the Bible was written by many different authors over many centuries, and you've simply got, you know, different documents cobbled together. And Bereshit chapter 1 is one author, Bereshit chapter 2 is another author. That is the academic Bible critic, completely superficial, textual reading of the Chumash, without any understanding of Torah min hashamayim. Torah min hashamayim means that everything written in the Torah has got infinite levels of depth. It's written min hashamayim, and if there are two narratives, it means there are two different dimensions to the human being, each of which has got a different narrative. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to give us a Torah which describes for us the way in which the human being, every man and every woman has within himself or herself, two different, if you like, concepts of self, concepts of fulfillment, concepts of achievement, and really roles to play in this world. And far from it being a conflicting story, on the contrary, chapter 1 and chapter 2 complement each other, right? So, for example, in chapter 1, you only find the name Elokim. The name of God is only Elokim. Elokim means power and dominance and forces, right? In biblical Hebrew, the word El, Aleph Lamed, simply means a power. It's a power. Elohim simply means powers, right? And in chapter 1, you only have the name Elokim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu being used. But in chapter 2, it's already Hashem Elokim, the Yud Kei Vav Kei. The Yud Kei Vav Kei name of God means God in his as an infinite being, transcending this world completely. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu has nothing to do with the physical world. He is completely in the world of the Ein Sof. He is completely in the world of Atzilus. And the world of Atzilus is the world of pure spiritual forces. So once you get to chapter 2, the Torah is already describing Hashem Elokim, that the human being can connect not just to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in terms of creating and using his powers to dominate and control the world. The human being can also create to HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yud Kei Vav Kei, which means the spiritual content of this world, the spiritual message, the spiritual knowledge. And this speech that he gave, the lonely man of faith, became a world classic, of understanding modern, if you like, modern man in the modern world, and grappling with living a spiritual life in the modern world. And next week, I want to have a look with you a bit more closely on this topic. I'll just end with a very interesting idea on the word Odom. The word Odom is the key word with regards to the human being. Aleph, Daled, Mem, right? It's interesting, incidentally, that the word Odom was not Mekubal, was not accepted really in Klal Yisrael as a name to use to call a child. You don't find any Rishonim or Achronim, or indeed in the Orthodox Torah world, nobody is ever called Odom. There are people who are called Noach. There are people who are called Chanoich, right? In other words, there are some names which we do get from the pre-Avram Avinu world, but Odom is not one of them. And it's an interesting thing. Why that is, maybe we can talk about that at some later stage. But I just want to tell you something interesting about Odom. So the Mefarshim explain, and this is more in the mystical realm, that actually all the mitzvahs of the Torah are all in three different types. There are mitzvahs which are connected to the Olam HaMaisa, the world of actions, right? There are certain things we are instructed to do, right? We have to blow the shofar, we have to shake the lulav, right? We have to sit in a sukkah. These are all maisim. These are all actions in the world of actions. And then there are other mitzvahs which are not connected to really actions, but they're connected to speech, to talking. There's the mitzvah of tefillah. There's the mitzvah of kriyas HaTorah. There's the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, mitzvah of kriyas Megillah. There are lots of mitzvahs connected to how we speak, and equally how we're not allowed to speak about lashon hara, blasphemy, all sorts of forbidden forms of speech. And that's different from the Olam HaMaisa. Olam HaMaisa are simply physical activities of wearing tzitzis. That is the Olam HaMaisa. That is the world of Maisa. And then there is a third type of mitzvah which are connected to the way we think. The way we think to have emunah, to have avas Hashem, to yiras shamayim, a perspective on life, to believe in the sodos of emunah. So really, all the action, all the mitzvahs of Torah revolve around thought, speech, and action. In fact, the Rambam classifies his mitzvahs into thought mitzvahs, speech mitzvahs, and action mitzvahs, and each one of those categories has got different laws to it and different dimensions to it, and it's very interesting to see that thought, speech, and action. Says the Arizal, thought, speech, and action is Adam. Adam, in fact, he says, is Roshei Tevas. It's an acrostic, right? That Aleph means emunah, which means thought. Dalad means dibur, which is speech. And the mem is maisa, which is actions. So Adam is emunah, dibur, maisa. Thought, actions, and speech. And these are the three categories of the human being, which are different from each other, but together combine to create a human being who is able to think in a particular way, to develop the thoughts of emunah and yiras shamayim, to speak in a certain way, right, without lying and without deception and without lashon hara, but with kedusha and tefillah and Torah, and maisim, to do actions of tzedakah, actions of Shabbos and kashrus, the world of the olam hamaisa. So if anybody wants to know what Odom means, right, the Aleph, Dalad, Mem, Emunah, Dibur, and Maisa is a shorthand, says the Arizal, for the real inner strength of every man and every woman, every human being is given these inner strengths. That's it for today, ladies and gentlemen. Next week, we'll look at the difference between the narrative of chapter 1 and chapter 2. We'll have a look at Rav Soloveitchik. If you have at home the book, The Lonely Man of Faith, and you have a spare 20 or 30 hours to read it with a dictionary, so that might be a good thing, a good challenge for you to do. Rav Soloveitchik, of course, was one of the great philosophers and thinkers of the previous generation, one of the Gedolei Yisrael. And this is arguably one of his most famous essays ever written. One of the most famous essays he ever wrote in his life is this Lonely Man of Faith, 1965, and still today it's required reading in many courses on modern Jewish philosophy, and we're going to have a look at it, please God, next week. That's it.